Before we get into that, something that came up, I noticed on your Twitter account this week, and it's something that we've talked about. I've talked about it on the Steve Dangle podcast a bunch of times. It's the fact that we have a ton of teams who are circumventing the cap legally, and it raises the issue of whether a hard cap is really even in effect, and if there aren't better options out there like a luxury tax. I know luxury tax freaks people out because they've seen what happens in the MLB with it. Let's start with LTI. Can you explain for the layman, for people like me, LTI from the player's side, from the agent side, how does it work, and how are teams using it to circumvent the cap?
Right. So LTI is long-term injury. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's referred to as LTI or LTIR, long-term injured reserve. And for a player certified by the team's medical staff to be injured and unable to play to the extent of missing 10 games, the next 10 games, or 24 calendar days is the definition within the CBA, that player then goes on LTI. While on LTI, that player's AAV can be used to, if the team is at the cap, which this year is $82.5 million, that team could now exceed the salary cap, the upper limit of the cap, by the amount of the player's AAV on injured reserve. So that's the definition. So you take a team like Tampa, last year Stanley Cup winner, when Kucherov came off LTI at the start of the playoffs, their actual payroll by AAV was over $93 million. So it causes amongst the other teams in the league, you hear in conversations, general managers very unhappy that there are a few teams that are able to spend to that amount. Obviously, you need to have a commitment from ownership to be able to go there. And this year right now, with Vegas, with Stone going on LTI, Eichel being activated, you've got also Martinez is on LTI. So that's for you. You're in the high 90s right now, mid to high 90s with Vegas's payroll.
They're spending the second most amount of money in the league.
Right. So that bleeds into the next real issue to discuss because they're interrelated. Why not have a luxury tax? Something that I've advocated for. It was part of the CBA negotiations back in 94, 95. It was actually back in the negotiations there. It was a central aspect of the NHLPA's position during the lockout in 2004, 2005. Gary advocated for a triple hard cap system with no ability to go over the upper limit other than through something like LTI. It's been used more extensively in the last few years than it has been since 2005. But a luxury tax with meaningful revenue sharing makes so much more sense for the NHL right now. There are approximately 18, 19 teams that are at the upper limit. Number of teams are into LTI right now. If you just allow teams to spend over the upper limit, but pay a tax for each threshold, whether it's $2.5 million over the upper limit, they pay a 25% tax. $5 million over the upper limit, between 2.5 and 5 million, you pay a 50% tax. 5 million to 7.5 million, you pay a 75% tax. 7.5 million to 10 million, you pay 100% tax. You're allowing teams have the commitment from ownership to spend to that level, but the cap is preventing them from doing it, all with the the league waving the flag of competitive balance, and we can't let the big markets outspend the small markets. And that argument is a total fallacy, because the floor is 60 million. So you had last year some teams, the smaller markets, just hitting the floor during the season, but the Tampas of the world were at 93 million.
Right.
Who won the Stanley Cup?
Tampa.
With their 93 million.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So you've got a 30 plus million variance. Where's the competitive balance? The whole cost certainty Gary Bettman argument is an illusion. It's been his great magic trick that he's played on the fans and the media, brainwashing them since 2005. And on Twitter, I see all the time, competitive balance. We can't have a tax. We need the cap. Competitive balance. You've been brainwashed. You've been brainwashed. It doesn't exist. You're always going to have the bigger markets have the financial wherewithal and the power to be able to go out there and spend. Why not let them spend what they already want to spend? Why should we prevent them from doing that if they can then pay a tax that they're willing to pay, and you have that tax going to the smaller markets as their revenue share?
Because right now that LTIR space is not being taxed, correct?
That's right. It's not. So
what is the tax based on? What's the equalization payment based on currently?
Currently, there's a formula in the CBA where a certain number of teams who fit within a certain demographic of attendance, size of the market, and so forth, qualify for revenue sharing. And there is a certain amount that goes into the pot and then gets distributed. But it is not a meaningful number. It never has been, because NHL owners don't want to support their brethren who are billionaires, but not willing to put that money into their payroll, right? They're billionaires. I mean, every NHL owner is technically a billionaire. When we're talking about revenue share money of $5 million, $6 million, $7 million a year. Yeah, it's a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the bucket. But now, what people don't understand is that by having a luxury tax, the system in and of itself becomes self-regulating, right? Because teams know if they're spending to a certain level, the money they're spending is going to trigger the tax, which is then going to their competitors, which they hate. So it becomes in the analysis, in the thinking process of a club, if we spend to this level, we get to retain our players. Because one of the biggest issues with the cap is it forces teams that otherwise would be willing to sign and retain their players. It forces them to trade players, good players, sometimes some of their best players, or allow them to go to free agency because they don't have the cap space to keep the team together. Think Chicago Blackhawks after being successful. Think Tampa Bay Lightning in a year. Anytime a team gets really successful, they are then faced with being capped out a year or two down the road after rewarding the players that helped them get to the finals, win a cup. And now they've got to trade some of their best players away. Is that good for hockey? No, it's not. Is it good for the NHL? No. It's one of the only sports that forces teams to get rid of good players. They have the money to sign them, they want to sign them, but they don't have the cap space to sign them. That's just plain wrong. And a tax would alleviate that problem. But the NHL, primarily Gary Bettman, has been adamant that he doesn't ever want to open the system up to let teams even retain their stars. And one other thing, in some sports, you have, a bird exception where you can franchise tag a player, or you can spend the money on a player that you've drafted, but not a player that you've traded for. There are different ways to get to the same point. The real import of this is Gary Bettman won't allow or even consider the players to go down that road. And it's bad for hockey. It's bad for the NHL. It's bad for the fans and the people who are, but we need this competitive balance. Come on. Look at the situation.
Well, let's talk about competitive balance just for a moment before we get into this. And I know we got to wrap this up, but Allan, and we'll come back to this. This is something we're absolutely going to cover more and more as Agent Provocateur goes on. One of the things that they talk about is, well, I'm a small market fan. I'm a fan in Nashville. I'm a fan in Arizona. I'm a fan in, name your city. I'm a fan in a lot of the Canadian cities. A lot of Canadians get freaked out about this because we saw 2 Canadian teams go south in the 90s. I'm a fan of this team. And I know the Torontos, the Bostons, the New Yorks, the Phillies, they're all going to be able to spend ballistic money. Tampa Bay now too, obviously. They're going to spend crazy, crazy money. I'm concerned that my team will not be able to compete. Allan, since the hard cap was instituted, what teams have done the best? And have we seen a leveling off of the field in terms of parity in the NHL, which they seem to want to always have?
I don't think we have any parity in the NHL. When you look at the bigger markets who consistently seem to win the cup every year, we have exceptions. There have been exceptions. Hockey is more than just the cost of your payroll per se. There's lots of other factors that go into it. But when you look at who's won the cup since 2005, and you look at the Chicago's, the Los Angeles's, the teams that have won multiple cups, and I consider Tampa, yes, it's not a huge market, but they have one of the richest owners in the NHL, 100% committed to spending what it takes to win. So I don't consider that a small market.
Right.
We're talking about teams that traditionally, you mentioned some of them, that have traditionally been more towards the floor than towards the top of the upper limit. So I think that when you look at that, right, like I said before, there is an illusion. The NHL sells the illusion of parity to justify the salary cap. Right. Why do we have a cap? What is the primary reason why Gary Bettman and the NHL owners, pushed so hard for a cap? The salary cap is directly related to the value of NHL franchises. And what you saw is once we had the cap instituted in 2005, at first it was slower, but there was a slow, steady rise in the value of franchises, right? You've now been able to control your cost of labor. And now as more revenue comes in, the value of the underlying business is worth more. But what you've seen the last 5 years has been an explosion of franchise values. And under this current CBA, because of the pandemic, we might have a flat cap for 4 to 5 years to pay off the escrow debt
Mhm.
that accumulated over the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So yes, the players received more money upfront than the 50-50 split of HRR in the CBA. And that money is now going to be paid back over a number of years to equalize again completely at 50-50. But the underlying value of franchises have exploded. They've exploded. And the players don't share in that at all. And that's why we have a salary cap.